All right. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone. This is an honor to be here. This is my second UGM. I was obviously the last one in Atlanta. We hosted in Atlanta last year. Let's see a show of hands. Who was in Atlanta last year at the UGM? Yeah, very good. All right. Cool. So today I want to talk to you guys about different transportation planning priorities and needs at the Atlanta Regional Commission and how we try to meet those needs with our trial demand modeling. And so some perspectives from our local MPO agency in Atlanta. So let's start first with our transportation planning priorities at ARC in Atlanta. Now, there's only a few of those. There's many more, obviously, out there. I've just listed a few, and I'm sure some of those are in common in y'all's region. So the first one, infrastructure investment, and the IIJA. We're all very familiar with the big infrastructure bill, and then this is something that's very important to our region, and I'm sure same thing in y'all's region as well. So our goal is to find funding opportunities that are most relevant to the Atlanta region, and along those lines, make sure we have the right tools in place. So whether it's trial demand software tools, that sort of thing. So I always make sure we keep up with the latest and greatest tools to meet those needs. Also reconnecting communities and safety, so traffic safety, in conjunction with connecting communities. Now in Atlanta, we had the downtown connector that literally went through downtown. So, I mean, it is what it is, but obviously there's an attempt here to reconnect these various communities throughout the region, and traffic safety, very, very important to a point where I'm trying to integrate that as part of our trial demand modeling. There is very, very few examples of that out there, but that's definitely a goal of mine. And also to deploy the electric vehicle and then charging infrastructure and electric grid resiliency. Now, it's great and nice to have, electric vehicles are up and running, right? But you got to have that sufficient grid in place. Let's make sure there's enough, power available, that the infrastructure is in place. So we're going to have a study at ARC probably early next year as far as the electrification of the region to meet those needs, to make sure we plan ahead, try to be ahead of the curve, so to speak, and make sure that everything's in place, but that the grid there's enough of a grid, because it's nice to have electric cars, but gotta have the grid to support it all. And also equity, environmental justice, pollution prevention, and climate change, greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, this is also very important. Equity is super at the top of our list in Atlanta. And so again, it's not only a matter of promoting equity, better equity and all that, but also to have the proper tools in place to do these types of analyses. So we have our planners asking us, all right, what are priorities? How can we best meet those needs for equity and diversity, and then make sure we have the tools as far as transportation is concerned. And also in our case at ARCs, our 2050 scenario planning and modeling for the major plan update. Regional transportation plan update. And we're working on it literally as we speak right now, and that'll be adopted next year. So next calendar year, we're going to be running all kinds of scenarios. Some that are with the active-based model, some are with other types of sketch modeling tools. So again, they're planning priorities at ARC, and then trying to meet those with our technical tools and modeling tools. So how do we meet those in Atlanta? First of all, we're way overdue as far as our travel behavior and household travel survey. So we're part with GDOT. Hattie is going to speak in a few minutes for Georgia DOT on this Next Gen and HTS National Household Travel Survey. That is a pooled funding effort. So y'all know there's this National Household Travel Survey effort going on. But obviously, it's a very small sample size for each of our region, right? So we have the option to add on with having a local add-on, to buy into it, to purchase additional samples, basically, to have a larger sample size to develop our models, because it's great to have all these trial demand modeling software and tools. You're going to get your travel behavior data from somewhere, and for the most part, it's from those household travel survey. In this case, there are two components. The passive OD data being collected. So we all have, I'm sure, here one of these smartphones. Or guess what? There's a lot of data being passively collected. You all know that already. And then the other component is the traditional household travel survey. Also, we're dealing right now, and everybody is in the world, I mean, especially here, but it's the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic considerations, right? We're hopefully out of it, although I keep hearing folks that still are getting COVID. So how does that affect trial demand modeling? Well, you have pre-pandemic travel conditions, basically considerations, and the pandemic happened. And now you have post-pandemic considerations. So how do you, our goal or our challenge at ARC, how do you put it all together? So we figured that in our case, obviously, in conjunction with the decennial census, 2020 should be the next baseline base year for calibration and validation. But at the same time, you want to stay away from 2020 because it's biased from the pandemic. Although we were getting data runoff for January and February of 2020, which is fine. You know, it was before they hit hard in mid-March. So anyhow, our approach is what we call 2020X. X being this, you know, this little factor here that we're looking into 2019 data, 2020, January, February, and then 2021 data. Anyhow, it's going to be part of a multi-phase model calibration approach. Back in the days when life was simple and easy, you did one shot, say 1990, 2000, 2010, census data, travel survey, and then you're done. Now it's totally, the ballgame has changed. Also, specifically in our case at ARC, is to finalize ActivitySim. ActivitySim is this new platform and model development for activity-based modeling, and Ben Stabler here in the room is one of those precursor of that effort of ActivitySim. So we want to make sure we have a user-friendly platform to run ActivitySim at ARC in a graphical user interface, something that our staff can easily pick up and run with it with a minimum of a learning curve. Now, ActivitySim for the demand side of things, obviously, there's a need to assign all these strips, and trial element modeling software like PTV Visum is the right way to go, in our opinion. Also, we want to do a better job to better quantify and visualize the Metro Atlanta's transportation-related carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions. Obviously, that's a major consideration in the region, in most regions in the country. At least we can do is to better represent what's being generated by transportation patterns, so we can finally visualize and quantify our own carbon footprint. And last but not least, here's to realign our trial element modeling software at ARC with the one from our colleagues at Hapte and his staff at the Georgia DOT. So we want to realign our platform. We're kind of all over the place right now at ARC. We have literally all the tools in the toolbox, so to speak, but we want to be more streamlined and focus our efforts and definitely closely coordinate with GDOT. And Hapte is going to talk about it in a minute, but in our case at ARC, there's a lot of traffic studies, traffic simulation studies that are using Visum, rightfully so, one of the best platform out there. So want to make it easy on our clients and users and jurisdictions, Visum, that just makes total sense. So anyhow, for trial element modeling, corridor analysis, sub-area, traffic studies. I want to say something about that model to go. I think it's going to be presented tomorrow, but to me, and this is by far the best. It's the best. I'll talk about an all-street network. I mean, that's got everything. We looked into it, and it's all there. So we are super excited that PTV is integrating this model to go. And we were fortunate enough to have a peek at the Atlanta network, and my gosh, it's the best I've ever seen. So kudos to the folks here in the room that are working on that at PTV. As far as trial element modeling at ARC, our needs in relationship with the PTV Visum platform. So in our case, we want a user-friendly integration with ActivitySim for the workflow. There's a workflow between ActivitySim and Visum that would be a nice interface, and I know Ben is working on it. Ben's got something right up and running, so we're super excited, looking forward to it. So it's a procedure to run ActivitySim from within Visum. That would be, that'll make it really easy on our staff and everybody, all of our users. And also an import function for the synthetic population. Now, not just for population sim. Population sim is one of those out there available from ActivitySim. There is other ones as well out there, PopSim that we use as well. So make sure there's that interface, that import facility in place. And then be able to visualize ABM trajectories. So, and we had Adam had a great presentation this morning about, some sort of ABM DT integration. There are trajectories, but I would add to this, it's not on my slide, but also path retention. Those path files that we all know, they're very large. Make sure we accommodate path retention, which I think Chetan told me it's pretty much a done deal. So the goal here is to be able to visualize trips moving across a road network. And then the last one, so this one here deals with air quality, very important in our case. So, maybe some Visum integration with APA's latest and greatest version of mobile, the motor vehicle emission simulator, which is MoveStreet, right? So MoveStreet is the latest and greatest for air quality from mobile sources. So have a, Visum MoveStreet inputs, pre-processing component of some sort. MoveStreet update for starts. The starts per day is one of the biggest change or component of MoveStreet. And maybe some relationship between trips per day and starts per day. That's something we've been working with EPA. There's some relationship between the two, and maybe to better quantify that. So starts per day and trips per day, there's definitely correlation there. HPMS, VNT adjustment factor. Well, we're all familiar with HPMS, right? So we use that for VNT adjustment in our models. And then some sort of batch file folder creation. I'm sure that's something easy to do. And then all the speed bins, accommodate all the speed bins, obviously. That's another component of the air quality model. So this is my 10 minutes. I don't know if y'all have any questions, comments, feedback. Happy to answer those.
Any questions for Guy? We'll have some questions at the end too. Any specifics on Guy's topics? Something about environmental justice.
Yeah, with the environmental justice, how will you be using the modeling to help out with that? And what type of information will you be looking at with the environmental justice?
Right. So currently what we're doing a lot of, we've developed a lot of in-house internal tools, so to speak, developed in-house, and we have some of those on our website. Most of them are on GitHub right now. It's just another way to post-process model results, right? So the model provides, trips and all that sort of things, socioeconomic data, but we're more or less trying to accomplish a deep dive into these model results to better get at the equity aspect and diversity that's coming out of these model results. It's not obvious. That's why you get a post-process your model results, and then there's Justice 40 and other tools available thanks to the folks at FHWA, but we're also doing some of our own in-house internally. Good question. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Guy.
Thank you.
All right, Matt, I think you're next. Let's get your presentation up here. Okay. You good to run this?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. So like Guy, I come from a metropolitan planning organization, DVRPC, or Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. We are the MPO for the greater Philadelphia region. So that includes 5 counties in Southeast Pennsylvania and 4 counties in New Jersey. So in total, there's about 5.5 million residents, 2.8 million jobs in the region. So it's a large region. It also has a very, is this on? Is it audible for anyone there? You okay? All right. Sorry about that. So we have very mature transit system, lots of rail lines. So we serve about 1.2 million transit trips a day, or at least we did before the pandemic. We're probably about 800,000 at the moment. This is a screenshot of our travel demand model. Actually, DVRPC has 2 travel demand models. We have a traditional 4-step trip-based travel model, and we also have a new activity-based travel demand model. The models are currently run in Visum 18. We are in the process of migrating them to Visum 22 and revalidating the models for a 2019 base year. Both the models, however, use the same transportation network. So we didn't wait for a model to go. We built our own all streets network, mostly from OpenStreetMap data, but a few other sources. So within our 9-county service area, we have every single highway facility, including local roads and cul-de-sacs. And then surrounding our region, we have what we call extended model area of additional 16 counties that are in less detail. They have larger zones. They have major arterials and above, and a few minor arterials. They're there mostly to capture trips that pass through the network or through the region without stopping or enter the region from outside. But in total, we have about 500,000 highway links in the network. So one of our priorities for the last several years was to do a better job forecasting truck trips through the region, and not just truck trips, but freight movements as well. So we've spent the last few years building a new tour-based truck model. The upper left picture there is a screenshot of some INRIX data that we purchased as one of the big data vendors. We got medium heavy truck trip origin, destination, and GPS path data. And then we process that data to help us build our travel model for trucks. The upper right-hand picture shows where truck stops occur, and they're color coded by duration. So we brought in the INRIX data on the stops and the location and the duration. We brought those in our travel model, and we matched those with the land use that was in the model. So we could see which types of land use led to truck stops and how long in duration they were. So this is sort of the flow chart of our truck-based model. We're generating truck tours by industry type. Each of those tours has a number of stops associated with it, and that stop has a land use tied to it and a duration. So moving forward, this is an example of some output of the truck model. This is one of the typical products that we provide. So this is showing the origins and destinations of truck trips at the traffic analysis zone. These are trips that are using Interstate 95 northbound at the Scudder's Falls Bridge over the Delaware River between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So the origins and destinations are shown in red and purple, and little bar charts according to how many trucks stop at each of those zones. And then we're also showing the paths that those trucks use to get to the bridge and where they go once they cross the bridge. So that's the orange line where the thickness represents the volume of truck trips using that link. This happens to be for a interstate highway that was previously free and is now tolled. So this gives you some indication on who would be paying those tolls. We've produced similar maps like this for a lot of our local municipalities who have neighborhoods complaining about too much truck traffic using the road through their neighborhood. So we can do these same sort of maps for those cases. In some cases, we find that most of those trucks on that road have a local origin or destination in that municipality and really can't avoid that. In other cases, we find that they're diverting from a congested facility and this is saving them time. So if we do some highway improvements on the nearby congested facility, we can move those trucks out of the neighborhood. This is the picture on the left shows two interstates. North-south is I-95. The east-west is I-276, which is the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So for 50 years or so, those two interstate highways crossed each other without an interchange and no way for traffic to get from one to the other, and confused motorists all up and down the East Coast. So recently there was a new connection was open to traffic to allow some of the movements in that interchange, but PennDOT and Pennsylvania Turnpike Commission ran out of money before they could complete the interchange, which was supposed to look like that. So we've been getting requests from Bucks County, where this interchange is located, to help them make a case for completing the interchange. So we're using both our travel demand model, Visum, and also our land use model, UrbanSim, to help them make the case for what would happen if this interchange were completed. And they're more interested in not just the volumes of traffic that would be using it, but they want to know how much additional development would occur in the area with the new ramp. So how much more employment would there be? And then they can convert that into an economic impact. And also for the traffic, that the additional traffic that's on the turnpike, that's going to lead to additional revenue for the Turnpike Commission. So we're using Visum to do the traffic forecast. We're passing along skims to Urban Sim. We're using Urban Sim to generate additional development that would occur with the enhanced accessibility and the interchange. And then we're feeding that back into Visum to get the final volumes, to get the origins, destinations, and the additional toll revenue. So this is sort of an example of how the practice has been changing over the years. The last 15, even last 10 years, most of what we did was forecast future traffic volumes or future transit ridership. Rarely do we have a project anymore where that's all people are interested in, is how much traffic will be on this new facility or this widened facility. They want to know where the traffic's coming from, whether or not it's cars or trucks, what the economic impact analysis of that traffic is. More and more, they want to know about the users of that traffic as far as their demographics, and we're going to get into equity in a little bit later. But it's not just highway volumes and transit ridership anymore. There's more and more things that MPOs are being asked to forecast. So we're going to talk about our plans for equity analysis, but just to show you where we're going. When we run our travel models, they produce a series of reports that summarize the outputs. And we have 15 or 20 of these standard reports that are done each time. And the way we do that is we use the procedure sequence in Visum to call Python scripts. And then each of those scripts are using the COM interface to pass data back and forth from Visum into Python. Python's doing some filtering, doing some tabulations, and typically writing those results to Excel. And then we're using Excel to produce a series of tables or charts or figures that show, if it's a base year model run, it shows the difference between the travel model output and our validation target. It can show the difference between base year and future year, between no build and build. So this is just showing you the highway comparison between model flows between what we call county planning areas, which are collections of municipalities, between the CTP and the highway comparison. So we plan on creating a number of these new reporting tools for equity analysis. We haven't done it yet, so I can't show you any, but we're going to meet with each of our planning partners, and that includes the 9 county planning commissions, the state DOTs, the transit operators, and they all have, most of them have their own plans for equity analysis, but they all have slightly different plans in place. Some of them are more concerned with accessibility to hospitals. Some are more concerned with fares that are being charged to different communities. Some are more concerned with who's paying tolls. And then they all sort of have different definitions of what communities are focused on, whether it's people in poverty or on welfare, whether it's minorities, whether it's people who don't have a car. In some counties, it's elderly is also included in that. So we want to meet with each of those, define the communities of concern, define the MOEs that they're interested in, whether it's accessibility, whether it's travel time, whether it's fares or tolls. And then we're going to create a number of these Python scripts to grab that data from our travel model and develop new visualization tools to help them understand what the implications are of whatever it is we're modeling, whether it's a project or a policy or a program. So I don't have example to show you, but I do want to show you the next 2 slides just show you the difference in employment access from 2 model runs. It's the same model run. This one is tabulated at the traffic analysis zone level. And the next one is the same outputs tabulated at the microzone level, which is what we use in our activity-based model. And microzones in our model are census blocks. So you can see just how different those 2 outputs look. but it's the same data. And, you know, the reason it's so different is just because of the disaggregation. So that was an example of geographic disaggregation, but when you disaggregate model outputs by household demographics or other characteristics, you can expect some significant difference as well. And there's one more example of our SEPTA, which is our regional transit provider in the Philadelphia area. They are revisiting the way they operate their regional rail system, the frequency, where the express service is, how much is inbound versus outbound during the peaks. They want to revisit the fare structure. Right now, it's there's for shorter trips that are mostly based in the city of Philadelphia, it's a higher fare than using a bus or subway to make a similar trip. So they want to see what the impacts would be of changing the fare structure, changing the way they operate it. But I can't get into too many details on this project because Keith Hardington will be here tomorrow to present this study and show you how we use Visum in the analysis to look at the impacts on the different communities in Philadelphia and how they'd be affected by this. So that was my last slide.
Any questions?
A great presentation. Thank you. So I have a question regarding truck traffic. Have you tried analyzing truck-only lanes or ever considered that?
We do not have HOV lanes. We do not have, most of the freeways in our region are 2 or 3 lanes by direction. We don't have the option of having truck-only lanes. The only exception to that is the New Jersey Turnpike. And if I go back to my first slide. So just leaving our region towards New York City, New Jersey Turnpike is a 12-lane facility, 6 in each direction, divided into inner and outer lanes. The outer lanes are for trucks and cars. The inner lanes are cars only. And some of that comes into Mercer County, which is the upper right orange county there. But other than that, we don't have the capacity to do truck-only lanes.
Great, thank you.
Okay. All right, thanks. Okay, next presentations are going to be virtual. So let's go here to other presentations. There they are. Okay, Thomas Hill from FDOT. Thomas, can you share your slides or would you like me to share them?
I think I can share mine. I'll do that.
Okay.
Getting there.
Yep. And then I think Hopti, you're next after that, and then Alex Hopti from GDOT, and then Alex Bettinardi from Oregon DOT. Thumbs up.
Can you see that okay, Ben?
Yep. Go ahead.
So if I can put this in presentation mode. Okay. All good?
Yes.
Good. Hello, everyone. Thomas Hill. Sorry I can't be there with you today. I'm the state modeling manager with the Florida Department of Transportation. We're housed under Forecasting and Trends Office. Happy to be here and talk through some of the things that we're doing with our models, speak primarily to our statewide perspectives on travel demand modeling, but a little bit on some of what we're doing locally. We are under the Office of Policy Planning, and our big mission here is to provide safety, mobility, and economic development analysis, primarily for strategic planning. We have 11 models in the state of Florida, including statewide model, turnpike model. We have several regional district models. Areas here that are flipping up in white are models. They're areas that are really rural in nature and are not included in any individual model, but they are in the statewide model. Our Northwest regional model, Jacksonville, it's an APM model. Central Florida model, it's a heavily GIS-based model. Includes a lot of area and different area types, and also includes the Orlando area and Disney and Universal and all of our a lot of things that are attractions to Florida. Tampa Bay has 2 regional models. Or there's an activity-based model and a behavior type model, and then one of our newest models is the Southwest Florida. It is a 4-step model, but it's a very well done model, and kudos to District 1 and their consultants for putting together a regional model. And then we have an activity-based model that's essentially SERPM, the Southeast Regional Planning Model. It includes several areas. It is an activity-based model. Treasure Coast model is a activity-based light model, if you will. They kind of aggregate up some of the resolution fidelity of the model. And then all of this makes up the Florida statewide model. We also have a separate turnpike model. It fairly closely resembles the Florida statewide model. The reason we have a separate one is because they use that for bonding of new facilities. It's not really a public model, but the Florida statewide model is. So our governance in Florida, we do a number of things. We try to provide consistency across Florida about how we build models, how we use our models, how we develop our models, and what data is represented in our model. We do this all under the Florida Standard Urban Transportation Modeling structure. It's to provide consistency across the state. Part of that consistency is the tools that we use. And so we are converting, in the process of converting from an older format. We've been have FSU TMS in place for 25 years, providing our guidance on how we model in the state of Florida. And we recently made a switch, one of them being to PTV Visum. This is what we converted the statewide model into. And currently getting our feet and using the statewide model in Visum. I think one of the advantages really is all this kind of interoperability for multi-resolution modeling, moving from a macro to a meso kind of level to a microscopic level. I think is one of the big advantages for us. With our guidance and our development and consistency across the state, we do this through the Florida Model Task Force. It's made up of the FDOT and our districts, our 7 district offices and Turnpike, but also our MPOs and public agencies. And all these agencies, public agencies, we all have a voice, right? It's a choice, it's a vote on how we model in the state of Florida and what our industry looks like. But importantly to this is also private industry, because they're a big part of what we do and our industry. Now, they may not have a vote to the public portion of it, but they are involved in our discussions and our direction in guidance of how we model in the state of Florida. We just initiated a whole new process called FSU TMS Next Gen, and it's a complete overhaul of our industry. Historically, our guidance has been towards model calibration and validation kind of standards, but we are also including policy, our structure, reporting, things that the state should provide versus what should be provided at a statewide or local level, and where we're going to be not only in 5 years but in 10 years. Where do we want our models to be, and how do we get there? So it's a completely new look at how we standardize in the state of Florida. For applications in Florida, in the statewide model, we really kind of do this for our SIS prioritization. The strategic intermodal system is our primary network of roadways in the state of Florida. We use the statewide model to evaluate our work program as a whole. What's the benefits of our work program, and what kind of gains are we doing, and what kind of gains do we get in 5, 10, 15 years? So it's a complete and comprehensive look of everything that's in our work program and what's the benefits that we're going to get out of our work program. Justification for the money that we spend, essentially. And through that process, it's consideration of congestion, and particularly cross-district projects that will have statewide benefits, not necessarily just district benefits. We also look at freight mobility and investment in freight infrastructure and what's the return on freight investments, and then some larger issues on system bottlenecks and network performance. one of the things that we've also been working on, one of the problems I think with modeling in general, has been our networks and its stick network. And we want to make sure that we have a consistency across the state with our networks. And we've always been trying to fit in our roadway characteristics inventory into the statewide network. It's never really worked, simply because of the linear referencing system. So instead, we backed out and built an entire system out of RCI. So we kind of did it a little bit backwards. But then now I'm looking at, I saw Guy's presentation and the whole new networks that's being rolled out by PTV. So that's really kind of exciting. I'm looking forward to seeing that and then comparing it to kind of what we did with our network, because I think moving kind of this linear reference system is really where we need to be for modeling, because that way it just opens up a whole series of safety data and data in general to help us with our modeling. So in terms of applications, recently we had hurricane came across the state of Florida, and we used the Florida statewide model to help us evaluate traffic and traffic flows for evacuations in the state of Florida, emergency operations. Part of what we do here is look for congestion points. Where do we need to put personnel out in terms of if we are evacuating a particular area in Florida? Where do we have an issue, and where do we need to get personnel out there? We are in direct communications with our emergency command center, so we get out a little bit ahead of the hurricane and start running some scenarios. And then also we do what is urban evacuation model, which is not really hurricane evacuation. It's in case you have an incident, say in downtown Orlando, who's there at any given time, and how many people do we need to evacuate? We use that as a regional kind of perspective and application of our travel demand models. On the automated and connected vehicles, one of the things that we did for this right before this hurricane, was we looked at the amount of electric vehicles that would evacuate from the Tampa Bay area and surrounding counties. We pulled Department of Motor Vehicle records in, and we could identify using the VIN number on each record which vehicle is a electric vehicle by zip code, and then we use that to estimate our demand for evacuation, and then looked at, well, what's the range of all these people that are going to be evacuating, and where would they need to charge? And based on that kind of range analysis, then we looked at, well, what's the available charging units in that range where people are starting to look to charge, and then what's the delay in queue based on the demand, so that we can move portable units into that area. So a really good application of the Florida statewide model in this case, and the analysis of electric vehicles in this case. I got the CAV note here just to kind of put a note, because when we do analysis on CAVs, and there's a lot of consideration on what's the benefits for CAV, there has to be consistency on the way that we model CAVs, because ultimately if we're overestimating the effects of CAV, becomes a liability to the department in the long run. If we're overestimating the benefits, then we're underestimating the impacts to our roadway networks. And if we're underestimating those impacts, then sooner or later, we're going to have to fix those things. So CAV and consistency in CAV, particularly freight and auto, are things that we have to make sure that we're providing guidance on and direction. And then the model data and the hierarchy, Florida statewide model is used essentially as a clearinghouse for data. We provide employment, population, roadway networks for all of our models across the state for development, again, for this consistency consideration. So looking back to this hurricane evacuation, one of the other applications that we looked at was we had a policy in place for contraflow. Essentially, we would implement contraflow to help with evacuation demand. And the thought was that essentially we could do better if we use the emergency shoulders. We can move just as much traffic without involving police personnel and keeping lanes open. There's a lot of issues with having police monitor the interchange and intersections with contraflow during a hurricane event. So we wanted to be able to leave lanes open while also moving as much traffic. So we used the Florida State model to evaluate contraflow versus using the shoulders, the emergency shoulders. And we use two different models in this process. We have what's the time model, which is essentially a hurricane evacuation demand model. All it does is calculate for all of our coastal counties, what is the demand of people that are going to evacuate based on the size and strength of a hurricane and the expected tidal flow. So it gives us a demand, but it also just really it gives us a clearance time, but it doesn't look at a statewide perspective. It just looks at that countywide perspective. How long does it take to clear people out of an emergency zone? But as we know, we have multiple counties evacuating all at the same time and over several days. We want to be able to look at what's the congestion point from a statewide perspective. So that we've been building the time evacuation model into the Florida statewide model so that we can evaluate demand. And here we looked at two different scenarios in the Florida statewide model, looking at I-75 for north-south kind of evacuation of Tampa. And we also looked at east-west evacuation from Jacksonville. Again, comparing contraflow to emergency shoulder use. And one of the first things you want to do is when you have a model result is look at what's the distribution of that traffic and does that make sense, right? Does your model make sense? That's the very first thing you do. Is you can kind of pull these kind of estimates out and say, yeah, this actually looks sense. We know this is actually right. We came in afterwards. After this is actually one of the scenarios that we ran, but we also did a survey of evacuation in the state of Florida and found that this is actually relatively accurate on our demand. And apologies for the confusion of this, but really what this is taking the outputs from this Florida statewide model and looking at it from a link by link perspective in a heat map. And so this gives me an idea of diurnal distribution and demand on I-75 by each individual link by time of day. And then also comparing if I just use one shoulder or if I use both shoulders, and then comparing this then to also the contraflow. The reason you see this big green block on the side, that is the actual contraflow lanes. So everything that's in white there, you can only run contraflow during daytime hours. You don't run contraflow at night. So when we compared the emergency shoulder to contraflow, our model results was able to show, well, we can move just as much traffic, we can save personnel, we can save time, and we can save money essentially for not having personnel out there, and we keep our lanes open. I mentioned a little bit earlier about urban evacuation. We use the statewide model also to look at who's in a particular area in a given event, like provided the example for Orlando. And looking at scenario planning, the Florida statewide model or any of our models they're uniquely positioned to identify who's in any given place at any given time, right? That they're dynamic because people make choices and they have a temporal dimension, right? So people will make choices that are not typical when they're in an emergency situation, so we can use our models then to help predict what those departures and destinations are. For example, if you're a parent and you have an emergency situation, what's the first thing you're going to do? You're not going to go home, you're going to go pick up your kid, right? But these things that don't typically represent in our models, what we have to do now is represent these things in our model to kind of have a better understanding of what people are going to do. When we have that and they have that demand estimation, then we have a better idea of what we can do in that situation. Do we keep people in place? Do we walk people to safety? Do we walk them out to transit? And then what do we do and what's the impacts and the downstream impacts on the people that are not directly affected? So if you're shutting down the interstate system, what are those downstream impacts? And so we've been working through several scenarios in our urban environments using our travel demand models. And to help us with this, it's not only our employment and population data, that's been disaggregated down to finite levels in our urban environments, but also cellular probe data, because that gives you a really good record of what people do and where they are at any given time during the day. And then the last thing that I guess I really talk about in Florida is our tourism model. This is something that we're adding now to the Florida statewide model. Tourism is an economic pillar to the state of Florida, and it's surprising what we don't know about how, why, and when people drive. He mentioned a lot of things about what they're doing and with their model up there, and the attraction of tourism, how people move about, is something that we really need to consider. For example, in Orlando, I-4 is the primary route for people traveling through there. And in the morning, it's very commuter oriented, right? 7 to 9 p.m. But once you move beyond that 9 p.m. traffic, 50% of our traffic flows on I-4 is represented by tourist traffic, right? They're not local, they're non-local people not that are using that facility, and they have different needs and different demands and different driving behaviors. And we need to understand how those work for safety and for mobility considerations and origins and destinations to help maintain our economic pillar in the state of Florida, if you will. And I think I did that in 10 minutes, maybe close.
Pretty close. Nice job.
Okay.
Just in time, like your model for evacuations. All right, any questions for Thomas? Yeah, go ahead. Jongson's bringing the microphone.
Yeah, when you were speaking about evacuation modeling, I was curious, after an evacuation happens, are you able to use any of that data to help validate your models, or is it just pretty difficult to collect data during an evacuation?
Yeah, no. So we did an evacuation study for Hurricane Irma that came through Florida a couple of years ago, and what we wanted to do was not so much validate. Well, I guess validate what we were doing, but we wanted to see how accurate we were. So we looked at speeds and demand, primarily on I-75. So we pulled traffic counts and speed records after or during the event and evacuation, and compare that to our demand estimation. And we were we were within 90% of what was actual. So I thought that was really good for us, and it builds a lot of demand. And these are the things that you market yourself for. So when you go back to your administration and they ask you, well, why do you exist, kind of thing, well, you can point to these kind of things and say, well, this is why you spend money on our models, right?
So Sajjadi from Arcadis. As you mentioned, one of the hardest part of planning for future is the consideration of the CAVs and how they are going to change our road networks, their impact, and also market penetration rates when we forecast the future. What was your remedy for that, and how did you took into consideration those market penetration rates?
Yeah, that's one of the beauties of our model task forces. So we have multiple committees that then provide research and information back to our larger body. As part of our process, we adopted statewide adoption rates and a procedure on how to evaluate CAVs. We wrote it all down into a document, and it's all publicly available on FSUTMSonline.net. So we, as a community, agreed on what our procedure is and what would be that adoption rate.
Question? Yep.
Hi, Ali Rahimi with HDR. I have a question about evacuation model that you mentioned. I was wondering how integrated is that travel demand model with the decision-making process of the public officials when they are like making the decision for the evacuation, like time-wise, because there are like hundreds of scenarios involved, and it's not easy to manually run those scenarios.
Yeah, we don't actually, in that process, when do people evacuate, when that order is called, we're not in that. We communicate with emergency services. There's a command center in Florida that communicates across other centers that are located across Florida during a hurricane event. When an evacuation is called, we're kind of trying to get ahead of that curve, because you know about a week ahead about where it's going to be. So I can run multiple, 3 or 4 different scenarios and say, okay, this is likely what it's going to be. Even if it moves off a little bit of what our analysis is, it's not going to change that much that I don't have something in hand. So it's not, the model isn't used for well, the statewide model is not used to make that call, but we do use the time model to say when that call is made, this is how long it's going to take to evacuate to safety.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Thomas. Hopdi, you're up next. Are you okay sharing your slides?
Yes, I can. Let me
Okay.
see if we can see my screen now.
Soon.
Can you see it?
Okay, yes, thank you. Go ahead.
All right, good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry that I was not able to attend in person, but at least Thomas and myself should have coordinated to be together in the same room. But anyway, I'm Hopdi Casa with Georgia Department of Transportation. I am the Assistant Head for Strategic Planning and Technical Services. Under the Technical Services, I manage all of the statewide travel demand models that I'm going to be discussing with you shortly. But before I do that, to highlight, what kind of, Guy presented is that we also, he mentioned that, he is in close coordination with the state of Georgia, with Georgia DOT, in order to be on the same page in terms of, travel demand models and all that. I just want to highlight that because at one of our General Assemblies, the previous Director of Planning mentioned that so goes Atlanta, so goes the rest of the state. His presentation or his address in the General Assembly, how important is Atlanta Metro? Literally 50% of the Georgia population lives within 20 or 21 counties of Atlanta Metro, where he manages all of the travel demand model. So, and then, on top of that, right now, the bipartisan infrastructure bill, it created two related, two new distinct yet related programs, the carbon reduction and the protect program. And our office of planning is kind of responsible to manage those two programs. And that is part of why I was not able to come to the conference in person. So we do have two different models in terms of, geography. We have one statewide model that I'm going to be talking a little bit more. That it is national in scope, but had the Georgia focus. And then we also have regional and county travel demand models. The Atlanta Regional Commission, for example, they have their own activity-based model, which Guy presented. And we also have 14 MPO models that we develop for the purpose of their long-range transportation plan. I think Georgia is one of the few states who does travel demand model for its MPO. So it's in a different platform. Our current modeling platform is Cube. This is basically a picture of where our MPOs are. We have 16 MPOs, have a different size and complexity. As you can see, there are 3 MPOs that go beyond the state border. You have Augusta that goes into South Carolina. You have Columbus, Phoenix City that goes into Alabama, and you have Chattanooga that goes beyond the state border. So with the exception of Chattanooga and ARC, the rest of the 14 MPO models, we do travel demand models for them. So that's basically what that slide is for. I'll talk a little bit about the Georgia Statewide Travel Demand Model. It is a transportation model, basically, that replicates existing patterns, forecast future demand conditions. It includes all of the air and land transit, railroad, and highway system. The way this model is engineered is you have the freight model separate, and you have the passenger model. And so the two models, they do their own generation, distribution, mode split, and then assignment. On the fourth one, it's a 4-step model. On the fourth one, on the assignment, both the freight and the passenger models, come together in terms of assignment. And obviously, they forecast travel demand, travel time. They show congestion, and then they kind of gives you the goods movement, because it is the freight module that kind of provides the freight movement. In terms of freight movement, currently we are the Office of Planning is undergoing the freight and logistics plan. Our travel demand model, which includes the freight module, is significantly used in that model. As you can see, this is the image of the statewide model, basically the coverage. As you can see, it has a halo zone structure, a lot more granularity in the state of Georgia, and then all of the surrounding states and counties are covered. As you can see, there is a good deal of granularity when it comes to Florida. I'm not saying that because Thomas is here, but that's basically the way it is. There is a lot of trips between Georgia and Florida. Because of that, we have a little bit more zones included in the GSTDM than any of the other states. This shows kind of timeline when the GSTDM was created and where we are now. The model was created back in 2008 and 9 with the 2006 base year and 2040 plan year. And right after the model was developed, we had a peer review, and we have the national experts at GDOT, and they deliberated. They looked at the model and they told us, what they think. Basically, we wanted to see whether our model is a state of the art and a state of the practice, and then they gave us some recommendations how to improve the model. GE was one of the peer review main panels, and so we kind of incorporated all of those recommendations. And the 2010 census came in, and we included the 2020 decennial census information into the upcoming model, and then we reviewed our model, and then we updated our model to the 2010 and 2040 horizon year. Once we did that, again, we did a second round of peer review back in 2018-19-ish. It was virtual, obviously. We couldn't get funding to do the peer review. We got additional more recommendations, and that was also incorporated. Now we are undergoing the 2020. Now we have the 2020 decennial census. We're including that information in the upcoming model. The model is, as we speak, it's being developed. We're kind of finalizing to validation and calibration of the 2020 model. As T was mentioning, I'm sure a lot of you guys are doing as well. 2020 is kind of because of COVID. We don't rely on that data, but we're trying to bring in 2019 traffic counts for each of the locations, and we're trying to calibrate that way. We also have 2019 Transearch data for the freight module, and that's what we're going to be using and validating our model as well. So that's basically the timeline. The 2020 and 2050 plan year updates and enhancements, obviously, because of COVID, again, we are using 2019 data. We are significantly using big data to develop a comprehensive model data set, basically for validation and calibration. We are using 2050 socioeconomic stakeholder workshop that we haven't done before. In order to do the forecast, we are inviting a lot of stakeholders, regional commissions. We have 12 regional commissions in Georgia, Georgia Economic Development, and other stakeholders. Then, we also will develop a lot of, intramural networks like 2030, 2040, 2050. We have what we call a STIPEX, a 10-year constraint plan. As of right now, we only have either a 4-year program, which is a STIP, and then we have the STP, which is a 30-year program. So now we're trying to create something in between that is too far out, and then once you do the STIP, and then it will be again time to develop another year of another round of STIP. So for that reason, we're trying to create STIPEX, and that this model will be significantly used into that effort. We're trying to better reflect the freight and truck transportation. Again, we purchased 2019 Transearch data for that purpose. Basically, the goal of the GSTDM is to, assist in multimodal transportation studies and the major corridor studies. There has not been any major corridor study at GDOT or in Georgia in general that did not or is not using currently the Georgia State Travel Demand Model. We are currently undergoing what we call a coastal empire study that goes to Savannah area, Chatham County, Bryan County, Effingham County. All of those counties are going to be, because of the port expansion and all that, there is a significant study that's being used. So the GSTDM is significantly being used for that purpose. The Savannah port expansion, there was actually a consultant working the Georgia Ports Authority, and again, the GSTDM in combination with Chatham County or Savannah MPO model was significantly used. We basically use it for a lot of different purposes. So, this is a lot of information loaded into this. You see the model output in the left corner, in the top left corner. We are incorporating a lot of different data sets. We are linking the TMC, the NPMRS TMC, the TMC segment into the GSTDM. And so that is basically what is being, so it's kind of, and I know I'm being short in time, but we are incorporating a lot of different, data sets into the GSTDM. We are changing from the regular network that is in the top corner and the top rows to a TrueShape. The 2020 enhanced model will be in TrueShape format. So, a lot of enhancements. You see 20 XO, that's 2020, 2020, 2030, 2040, and 2050. As I was saying towards a couple of minutes ago, I was telling you that the STIPEX effort, well, that is the 2023 to 2033, the 10-year constraint plan. And so that is going to be, we're using the statewide model to see the network analysis where the congestion is, where the needs are, and everything else. So again, the model is being used significantly. Again, there are a lot of enhancements to better reflect the freight and truck transportation. Transearch data is being used, and so a lot of things from the freight and logistics plan update. It will be completed anytime in the next couple of months, if not sooner. That's going to be incorporated into our model as well, and vice versa. The freight and logistics study also used our model in order to see where the freights are going, where they're coming, where they're going, and all that, since it has a freight component. Again, there is a lot of linkage whether it's evacuation routes, NPM model. I'm not going through everything. Equity, APA model, resiliency. There is a significant research study that we're doing now with Georgia Tech. That resiliency study or the network vulnerability index will be included into the GSTDM. So there will be a lot of, from the boundary perspective, you see all of the 16 urbanized areas or MPOs that I showed before. We have 7 JIDA districts, we have a county, we have pretty much everything else. This is kind of where, basically what we are using. And I think the most important thing now is we're trying to go into, as Guy said, to try out and to switch our modeling platform to, Visum. And before, doing that, I spoke with a lot of different offices that use the Visum product, whether it's our roadway design, traffic operations, safety office, and all that. All of them, as soon as I mentioned that we're trying to switch into Visum platform, they were very excited because they have the PTV product, which is, Visum for micro simulation. So when I told them that I'm going to be, trying to switch the model, they're very excited, and I have meeting with pretty much all of the other offices, including their consultants. So with that, I know I ran a little bit over, but I will stop there and see if there is any questions that I can answer.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the audience? No questions? Okay, I had a question. There's a lot of different data sources in the statewide model, and a lot of times the data sources conflict or are just messy and need to be cleaned up. Like, I think a lot of times people underestimate how much work it is in data cleaning and processing and integration and stuff for a big effort like that. Can you speak to a little bit how, you go about that process of reconciling all that data at the statewide level for all of the needs?
Yeah, good question. And the consultants, Mara Mobility is, doing that, exactly that. So let me just say, from the network perspective, we have the TMC channels, right? And then you have the actual, transportation network or the highway, the model network. So in order to do that conflation, it's not that more of, adding the volume into the transportation network, but making sure that the two data are kind of, agreeable. So they put it in a shapefile, they will look at it, and they will see the seamless integration between the two. And the other data source that we talk about is, let's say, you have the Transearch data. You have the Transearch data. You have, the way the data came is from county to county flow, right? By 16 different, kind of, commodity flows. And so when you get that data and then trying to, merge it with other data, it's always messy. It always takes time to kind of, merge the two data sets and making it able ready to use it in the model. So there is a lot of effort that goes into it, but there are a lot of different, consultants within our, modeling consultants that are taking part. So, we have 3 different consultants working, kind of, to make sure that they clean up the data. They merging the 2 different data sets from different resolution, the different sources is very difficult. Right now, we're working with Esri, for example, to get employment data. They gave us based on our traffic analysis zones, but we compare them with our own data. There is some variability. So we always work very hard to make sure that these different data sets are kind of talking to each other and really useful for our modeling purpose.
Okay, thanks. All right, let's go to our last speaker, Alex Bettinardi from ODOT. Are you okay sharing your slides, Alex?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot here. Is that going to?
That works. Yep. You can speaker mode. Okay, thanks.
Good. All right, yeah. So all my fellow presenters here did such a good job kind of summarizing up all the different things that the industry is, trying to move forward. So luckily, I didn't do a ton of slides, so I'm gonna keep mine pretty brief, I think. Not needing to repeat a bunch of that. So I'll just give a little bit of the Oregon context. So one thing that makes Oregon's program a little bit unique is underneath our group, the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit. We've got 3 teams that kind of, as Guy was talking about, a lot of consulting firms are moving to Visum to do their traffic analysis. So we have 3 teams that are doing from the modeling analysis work, and then pushing down to our next team, who's doing the analysis, the engineering planning work with those modeling results. And then we also have a team that's doing the monitoring and reporting that's needed for federal requirements as well as state requirements. So, and for the most part, we have the PTV kind of across these different groups. So that's been the vision, is to move PTV across these different groups, hopefully with unifying that software, simplifying our processes and procedures. So that's one element that's a little bit different than maybe what's been talked about today. Guy mentioned wanting to make sure customers, it was easy to transfer that data to external customers, which we're interested in as well, but also internally we have selfish interest to kind of keep that streamlined and as simple as possible, which is part of our reason to utilize Visum as part of that suite. So I'm talking mainly about our use of Visum on our modeling side. And so within that larger group, TPAL, the Transportation Planning Analysis Unit, we've got a modeling team that's focusing on developing, implementing, and applying our travel forecast models to supply long-range transportation planning and policy development. And we employ a variety of tools like Visum, but also other modeling software, spatial analysis software, and programming languages to do that. So kind of our priorities and our purpose, our the reason we exist, primarily it's around supporting regulatory compliance. So that's helping ensure that the MPOs in the state of Oregon can complete their RTPs. We also have for our cities within the state, we have transportation system plans, and any air quality analysis and NEPA grade analysis that might be needed. That's primarily why we're there. With these tools that we develop, we also help support all our state policy development and analysis needs. So for us right now, that's our Oregon Transportation Plan, Oregon Highway Plan at the statewide level, as well as our freight plan. We're also helping support the tolling analysis that's being done in the Portland metro region, and some of our seismic earthquake analysis as well. So we got regulatory work, we got policy development. We're also working to continue and build our models through data acquisition and dissemination, and so we're up against some of the same challenges that a lot of people have already mentioned right now around the census and COVID, and we have an upcoming survey that's going to be launching next year in 2023. So all those things are ongoing. And then our office also helps develop some of the procedures and guidance that's used around analysis and modeling, similar to what was mentioned by Thomas in Florida. So I was going to just quickly talk about kind of 4 of the tools that we have that are using Visum, just kind of briefly describe kind of what we have and how that functions. So at the statewide level, at the biggest level, we have our statewide model, similar to some of the others that have been discussed. Maybe where ours is different a little bit is that ours is an integrated economic land use and transportation model. And so early on, when we were first close to 12 years ago, I think now, when we were in our second iteration of the of the statewide model, our model works at 2 different zone scales. It works at a larger land use zone level, and then a TAZ assignment level. And so, for a long time, I think longer than most, although I don't know exactly the history timeline for all the transportation support software, Visum had the ability to have zones and main zones. And so for a variety of other reasons, that was very beneficial to us to have all of our kind of spatial input data in the one software platform, as opposed to having it spread out across GIS, different spatial files. So that was one uniqueness to the statewide model, having kind of 2 models operating in one, the land use model and transportation model. And that was a benefit early on benefit was Visum's data management. And so I won't belabor any of these, but there's a lot of things that we use our statewide model for. We use it for statewide policy, like I already mentioned. It does have a freight model, so we do a lot of freight flow analysis, similar to what Matt was mentioning in Delaware Valley. We also have, we do a lot of work zone analysis. A lot of our areas in the state are really sparse, so different than an urban MPO area. When you have work zones, whether it's a 60 or 100-mile detour, it helps. We get a lot of questions around the impacts to help with long distance detours, and understanding liquidated damage estimates and projections, so that we can keep contractors either properly incentivized to wrap the work up as fast as possible. We also use our statewide model where no other model exists. So I missed the transition a little bit, but I wanted to say, building off of the success of our statewide model with the 2-zone system, moving into ABMs, we have our first ABM in Oregon that's covering 2 MPOs in our southern Oregon region. And like it's already been mentioned, it has both an MAZ and a TAZ structure. And we've found, as well as a transit access point, that 3rd zone for the transit stops. It's got the 3-zone structure, and Visum has been really great at having all of those in one spot. So it's been another strength, and something that we use. We're moving forward with Visum into our ABMs, and then we still have our a handful of our most of our models are still trip-based models. We're shifting into activity-based models after the next survey that's going to happen in 2023. And and almost all of our tools our trip-based models are now in Visum software. We for a long time we were bridging two softwares, and we're now kind of fully shifted to having all of these, the statewide model, the ABM, and the trip-based models all in Visum. I would mention that just so it's clear, all of the tools ODOT manages are in Visum. There's 3 other MPOs, similar to Atlanta and Georgia, where there's MPO level modeling within Oregon, and so not every region in Oregon is using Visum, just ones that ODOT supports. Last slide here, just kind of talking about kind of where we're going, and these have already been hit on by a lot of other speakers. But our key role is using these tools to support RTPs and federally required efforts. We have our survey ongoing that's going to really shift us into the kind of the next generation of tools, where again, has already been mentioned, equity is a huge push for us. Understanding multimodal travel better, GHG analysis, and future technologies. So we're going to be pivoting off of our next survey to really kind of shift into this next generation of travel tools, travel demand models that will help better answer these questions. I think Matt did a great job of expanding or explaining how the questions are changing, and they're similar here in Oregon. And so I sent him an email on the side. I'm very interested in those scripts that he had, that he called out in his procedure file. Similarly, in Oregon, we're working on an expanded set of performance measures, and that's a big push for us, is getting away from just volume projection on highways and transit systems to, kind of really understanding who's using it, where they're coming from, all those questions that Matt mentioned. And then lastly, not working on one forecast, but on providing a range of forecasts so that our plans can be resilient and can be the best outcome across a range of possibilities. So that's something we're actively working on and getting in as well. So I'm going to call it done. We can shift into discussion.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Any questions for Alex? Alex, I have a question for you. In your picture, can you put that last slide back up? I think under the uncertainty and resiliency, I think that little kid's wondering why they didn't stripe the whole road. No.
Right, they're waiting for the plants to sprout up. Like, when are they gonna, right.
Actually, though, can you talk a little bit more about uncertainty and resiliency? I mean, this topic comes up a lot, but it's difficult for models usually because they're very, they often forecast typical or average or those types of things. So what kind of, what are you doing about that in Oregon, and what do you think others should be doing about it?
Well, there's a lot more we could be doing, right? So lots of ideas and not a whole lot of energy or time. But so in our Oregon Transportation Plan, so our last one was 2006, we're doing a new statewide Oregon Transportation Plan that our team is a part of, and we're working, the hope is that'll lay kind of a broader framework down to set up in the same way. I like the way Thomas was describing it in Florida. There's a million one ways these can go, but having kind of state policy discussions around kind of setting some goalposts. And so we're hoping the Oregon Transportation Plan, which is doing a lot of work around resiliency and building policies that will hopefully be resilient against kind of a overwhelming uncertainty. We're hoping that will set some of the conversation goalposts for like the range of things to consider in RTPs and down in project analysis and as well. So we're using a team at BMAT for people, or for anyone that is familiar, along with Vision Eval, to explore kind of those thousands, many thousands of scenarios, which will then hopefully give us a lot of explanatory power into where we need to invest time and energy in the more time-intensive tools like our statewide model, our ABMs, things like that. So without having to fully explore the space in those tools, we can see kind of what moves the needle and focus the conversation and further more detailed plans. I could probably talk a lot more about that, but if that answers the question, I'll leave it there.
You got a follow-up question?
Yes, Alex. Two things. Your statewide model is impressive in the aspect of that work zone analysis, where you use that for lane rental. I've experienced for I-45 in Houston, where we use Visum and augment that with street light data in order to calculate for lane rental. Now, the other thing, my question really is on the aspect that you mentioned. You have also built the model so that you can do traffic impact assessment. And so is that because you have also to that level of detail where you're able to do traffic impact analysis? So I'm just thinking maybe you have super zones. You mentioned super zones, so you calibrated the model at a higher level, and then you have also the other zones so that you can look up for so that you have level of detail that you can do traffic impact analysis.
Yeah, I think that's all correct. As you stated it, right, we have these different models and working at different levels, and you can calibrate at different levels, and you can answer questions at different levels. So I don't have a lot to add. I'm not sure if I'm answering the question, but I think you stated it, well and correctly. If there's a question I missed, I'm happy to answer it.
I think about the level of detail in order to do traffic impact.
Oh, what's the level of detail required? Well, I think we'd always desire more. If this question is kind of geared towards the statewide model, I don't know if I would say that our statewide model is at, like, from a modeler's perspective, the desired level of detail. It's just, it's the tool that we have, and if there's a question in an area that has no other information, we're always we always work to provide the information we feel we can, professionally and confidently provide. So again, not fully answering the question. I guess if it kind of answers the question, I wouldn't say that our statewide model is at the level to which you would. It wasn't designed for traffic impact analysis. It was designed for higher level policy questions. But if no other model exists, we strive to review and see if there's information we can provide to help guide some of those more detailed questions, even though the model isn't fully detailed, as detailed as we'd like it.
Okay, thanks. Was there one more question? Yeah.
All right, I don't think you can see me in your video feed, but I'm in the back. Regarding the detour, you mentioned you're using the model for some detour analysis. Are you looking at the cost of delay along the routes of rerouting all the vehicles with the detour? And are you also looking at, like, maybe paying for damages on roadways because of the detour traffic, maybe using local roads or something like that?
For the most part, it's just looking at kind of user impacts, the amount of delay that the users face. When you mention impacts to local roads due to, for the most part, heavy vehicle shifting, so that the statewide model does have a freight component, and we do look at costs on both personal travelers as well as on the freight side, the amount of the commodity shift and the loss of time to those shippers. We typically don't look at damage to the local infrastructure for those reroutes, but we have looked at those questions. In the state of Oregon, we have a pretty dire funding situation. It's a little bit different state by state. In Oregon, it's particularly bad. And we for a long time, we have not had the funding to maintain our bridges. And so that's going to mean a lot of weight restrictions moving forward into the future, a lot of disinvestment on the system. And so we've been looking into those questions on large scale, not just a single closure, but on large scale reductions in freight being able to ship freely throughout the state, we have looked at what that means to shifting to local roads, which ultimately is not a sustainable solution either. They don't have the funding to support these truck movements either. So we probably haven't answered the question in as detailed a way as you're describing, which would be, I think, a very interesting thing to attempt. But we have explored that question about what does it mean to shift heavy freight off of the state system.
Okay, thanks. All right, so we have just a few more minutes, I think, right? We have 5 more minutes, is that right? And so we're going to leave time for some discussion, but we only have a few minutes, so I'll just ask you guys a couple questions. And so anyone on the panel, feel free to answer the question, or if anyone in the audience would like to answer the question, for their region or for their stakeholders. After I saw the presentations, it seems that there's kind of 3 different types of key areas of improvements or challenges, right? We have changes in technology like EVs, CAVs, big data. We have social, political, environmental needs, equity, accessibility, climate change, things like that. And then we have better tools, integrating modeling at different levels like microsimulation with macro models, land use modeling, sub-area analysis. What would you say is the most difficult challenge of those 3 in your region, and why, and what are you doing about it? If anybody wants to go first.
Yeah, I'll say in our case, it's the technology of automobiles and vehicles in general. So electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles, because right now this new concept, and I think Thomas, I got that from Florida DOT, is this new acronym is CASE or ACES, autonomous, connected, electric, and shared. So this is also this all-inclusive type of vehicle type that we now need to introduce into our models, vehicle type modeling, for instance. So back in the days it was AVs, now it's really changing, emerging, and evolving. So it's a matter of keeping up, make sure models are keeping up with the latest and greatest nomenclature and the vehicle typology.
I think from my perspective, the biggest challenge is going to be connected and autonomous vehicles. If you're familiar with the new Highway Capacity Manual 7, there's a number of procedures that account for those vehicles in the mix. And every one of those procedures needs a market share or penetration rate. And the difference in capacity between a 30% share and a 70% share is enormous. And it's going to be up to the MPO to be able to forecast what that share is going to be 20 years in the future. And I have no idea how to do that, but I'm going to have to find out. And then we're going to have models that will reflect that in the way they assign traffic.
I'm not sure if it fits into any category, but we need to do a better job on messaging what we do and who we message to, because we've got a lot of really brilliant people in our industry, and we can figure out a lot of things and how to represent them in our travel demand models. What we don't do well is convert it to English, right, into language that people can understand and build trust in the results that we have. We're reaching out, and we don't have a crystal ball. We have an estimate, right, and we need to do a better job of just communicating our results in a refined package that's easily understandable, right? We don't have to speak to all the dynamics that go into our models. Somebody wants to know, they'll ask us a question, but what we have to do really is kind of transmit our results while also building a level of trust in what we do. And I think kind of that trust level industry-wide is slipping a little bit because there's just so much stuff out there.
If I could say, I think that all that list was pretty overwhelming, Ben, as far as what the right challenge is. From a kind of a more manageable challenge, Oregon's moving into the next survey. I think it sounded like a number of us are, and so we're kind of getting back into survey augmentation, and for that you need a good network. And so I was aware of PTV's Model to Go. I didn't think about the fact that Model to Go needed a really good network to go along with that. So I think has already been discussed, linking TMCs and other conflation onto a network is really important. For us, we want to be able to move into better congestion and delay representation without going to full-blown, like, high-level meso or micro DTA. So that means better techniques at representing intersection level delay, and having a network that's prepped and ready to, I'd say that's a challenge that our industry has had for a long time, and needing to keep working on how to inventory large networks like this.
If I may add just a little bit to what Thomas said, from the statewide model perspective, it's all of the connected autonomous vehicle pilots are kind of concentrated in the Atlanta metro. I think Guy can speak to that. But it's just a different office that kind of manages the connected autonomous vehicles. Yes, there is EV plan, which is a little bit separate. The EV plan, by the way, the Georgia Navy plan, not EV plan, but the Georgia Navy plan is one of the 35 plans that was already approved a couple of weeks ago. But when it comes to connected autonomous vehicles, it is the traffic operations who is kind of managing that type of pilot projects and programs and what have you. So including them, are they not really matured yet? Kind of applying them into statewide model is kind of difficult. You need kind of smaller, because statewide model is kind of on a higher resolution. It includes only the higher rank functional classification roads. So that's kind of the challenge. That doesn't mean that it's not going to be included anytime soon, but it's just under consideration. And we have a lot to learn, and we have a lot to do further.
Okay, I think that's it then. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, panel, for giving us a lot of great advice. And now we'll have a break. And Guy and Matt, you can continue the conversation with everyone during the break. And the rest of you, well, I guess we'll chat you if we have questions.
Thanks, Ben.
Sounds good.
Thanks.
Thank you.